Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am Angela Love-Zaranka with Lactation Education Resources. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And good morning or afternoon or evening. I am Sekeita Lewis-Johnson with Lactation Education Resources. Thank you for joining us today.
So we are going to get started and talk about what it means to become a board-certified lactation consultant or an IBCLC. I have been working in the community for over 30 years. I've been board certified for 25. I just submitted my recertification paperwork just yesterday, Sekeita. So I have worked in the hospital as well as in private practice in all sorts of different settings. What about you, Sekeita?
So I've been a nurse working in maternal child for about 25 years now. Excuse me. I've been a lactation consultant almost 14 years. And I am so excited that I don't have to resit for an exam next time I certify. So, but I also too share some of your story, Angela, whereas I worked in a hospital before, I work in the community. And yeah, so, and I've been doing that probably before I became an IBCLC because I was a CLC prior to becoming an IBCLC. So yeah, we have some experience together.
Yes, indeed we do. And so between the two of us, we kind of know what it is, what that landscape is, and how you can find the ways in order to fulfill your passion and become a board certified lactation consultant. So first, just a little bit of housekeeping. Asking questions on the GoToWebinar platform is relatively easy. If you're on a desktop, you will find it in the middle of this interaction bar. It's got the blue arrow pointing to it. Now, GoToWebinar is a little different in that we don't have a chat feature, but if you have something that you'd like to say to Sekeita or I, such as where you're participating today, please feel free to type it into the questions box. Now, if you are participating on a mobile device, then you can see the question mark at the bottom of your screen, and you can see that by the green arrow. We're highlighting it here. So if you have a question for us, or if there's something that you'd like to chat to us, please feel free to do so via the question box. Okay, so also on our call today, we have Kim. So Kim is also a board certified lactation consultant, and she is part of our amazing customer support team. So she's going to be monitoring the questions, and she can answer many of them in the actual chat, and those questions which are universal to everyone, or if there's a bunch of people asking the same question, she will type the answer and make sure that everybody sees this. If you are watching on YouTube, please post your questions in the comment box. We do keep an eye on that. Or you can contact our amazing customer support team at support@lactationtraining.com. And I'll go through that again in just a little bit. So let's dive in and take a closer look at what it is to be a lactation consultant and how you can follow your passion and become one. If you decide to become an IBCLC, you will join more than 34,000 IBCLCs in over 129 countries and territories. Credentialing as a lactation consultant is offered by the International Board of Lactation Consultant Examiners. So you can take a look at their website, iblce.org. They have different regional offices depending on where in the world you reside or work. Review the requirements and pathways to become eligible to take the IBLCE exam. What do you need to know? Well, the things that you need to know to become an IBCLC are items which are covered in the detailed content outline. It used to be known as the exam blueprint. It's based on surveys of IBCLCs in various practice settings around the world. The outline covers all of the topic areas and all the chronological stages an IBCLC needs to know in their work. LER courses cover the entire detailed content outline, and our courses are approved by LARC, which is the Lactation, Education, Accreditation, and Approval Review Committee. And essentially, that's the organization that evaluates and approves our lactation consultant training courses. So I'm going to turn it over to Sekeita, and Sekeita is going to go over what are those questions that you need to ask yourself today as you're getting started on your journey. Sekeita?
Thank you, Angela. Yes, so while we're speaking today, and before we dive in, there's some questions you may want to ask yourself. And we're going to go over the skills, but as we're going over the skills, ask yourself, do I have these skills? And when I say skills, I am not talking about just the hands-on, I'm going to jump in, I'm going to do all these things. I am talking about all of the skills that we're going to review with you today. And if you find that with, excuse me, any of the skills that you're like, whoa, wait a minute, hold up, I don't think I have that expertise yet. Ask yourself, where can I acquire these skills? Where would I get these skills? And so it might help you to write these things down. It might help you to journal about them. It might help you to really kind of plot out your own journey and your own pathway to becoming an IBCLC. So what makes an IBCLC, International Board Certified Lactation Consultant? I talked about skills, but let's talk about competency. Competency is critical. It's necessary to make sure that you provide adequate and appropriate lactation support. So in essence, competency means that you have the ability, the knowledge, and the skill to do it successfully. So at the end of your training, you want to be confident that you are doing no harm, and that essentially that is why competency is important. Excuse me, I just got this frog in my throat all of a sudden. Culturally appropriate and credible go hand in hand. Let's really unpack what culturally appropriate means. If you worked in healthcare or been around anyone, or even in other business sectors, you might have heard the word culturally competent. That word, I just talked about, what competency is, right? So think about this. Can you ever become competent in someone else's culture? So let's be really clear about what we're saying when we talk about cultural things, right? As we're talking about language and how language is important these days, we want to make sure we're using terms that make sense. So culturally appropriate is more fitting for where you want to be. And being culturally appropriate starts with cultural humility. Cultural humility is defined as a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another's culture, but starts with an examination of their own beliefs and cultural identities. And that definition can be found from the National Institute of Health. So that's just one definition of cultural humility, but it really is a lifelong process. So when we're talking about cultural humility, it's important to really think about what that means. And that really means starting with ourselves. Sometimes you'll hear people say things like, it's not in their culture to do X, Y, and Z. That's not really culturally appropriate. So we want to avoid saying things like that, because really within cultures, there are subcultures. So the first part of being culturally appropriate is really not feeding into stereotypes, not making assumptions about what someone will or won't do based on their culture. Because you really don't know unless you've been told by that particular person that I, as an individual, representing my culture, and sometimes cultures are not monolith. From a point of people are not monolithic within cultures, I should say. So you want to be sure that you are really keeping the individual in mind and being culturally appropriate with that person. I hope that made sense. But credibility goes with culturally competent. So are you a credible resource? When you're asked something and you don't know the answer, how do you respond? Do you try to figure it out and just go off whim, off of your lived experience? Or do you say, hold on, let me find the answer And let me get back to you. I'm asking that question, do you go off a whim? Because almost everyone want to tell you their breastfeeding or their chest feeding story, right? And oftentimes in lactation land, we talk about how that peer support is critically important. But when we're being of service in a professional manner, you really have to not rely on your own story, but rely on what the evidence says. So the question then becomes, do you know what the evidence says? And if you don't, do you know where to find it? We're not walking dictionaries or walking computers. It's truly impossible to know everything. So that's not what I'm suggesting. However, demonstrating credibility is about being forthcoming. It's about saying things like, I'm not quite sure about that. Let me get back to you. And then check the resources, credible resources, and get back to the client in a timely manner. So professionally speaking, credibility is everything. If you lose credibility as a lactation consultant or lactation supporter, it could translate to other IBCLCs losing credibility as well. Policy advisor, creator, and advocate. So a couple of things, other things that we do as IBCLCs is we advise on policy. We actually help create policies. And that's important to know from the standpoint of talking about clinical care. Remember when I asked, do you have the necessary skills? Well, some people already work in policy. So if policy is your strong suit, I'm like, yep, you already have those skills and we need you. Because as I said before, language is important and the language in policies matter, because poorly written policies can end up with unintended negative consequences. So if you're a policy person and that's your thing, you already have that piece. However, being a stakeholder is another form of policy work. So those of us that are not strong in policy, we're stakeholders. So we are stakeholders and we should be at the table whenever lactation specific or related policies are being discussed. All right, advocacy. Advocacy is big. It's a big part of what we do and who we are. An advocate is simply a person who publicly supports or recommends a particular cause or policy. So even if you're not a policy advisor, so to speak, you can be that person at the table listening to how policies are created and sharing your perspective. Problem solver and researcher. Being a problem solver is probably about, I would say 99%, but really it's about 90% of what we do, because each family has their own concerns. And really, when lactation consultants are called for support, it is usually a request secondary to some type of problem or issue that the family is having with breastfeeding, lactation, or chest feeding. So be mindful about framing lactation concerns from a one-size-fits-all framework, and understand that one size never fits all. And we really should be problem solving from the individualization lens of what the individualized lens of what the particular family and their concerns they're sharing with you. Along with being a problem solver, remember I said sometimes you have to go back and say, I don't know. That's what being a researcher is. There's two ways to be a researcher. You can be one who carries out academic or scientific research, or you can be the person whose job involves discovering or verifying information. And that is essentially all of us. High-level lactation care and skilled. These two go hand in hand. When we talk about high-level lactation care, we're talking about a level of care that a person taking maybe a 20-hour course wouldn't be able to provide. So I'm going to give you an example of basic breastfeeding care, which is assisting with latch and positioning when an infant and parent are both well, there's no other concerns, I just need a little bit of assistance, versus someone who's in the ICU, intensive care unit, who was lactating prior to going into the intensive care unit, and they're intubated with a breathing tube. Are you able to deliver that type of care? Are you able to look at their medications and say, okay, I know what to do? Are you able to say, whoa, this person is intubated? Maybe they have a brain injury. How does that brain injury impact lactation? Are you able to make the connection? So when you're doing your training, sometimes it seems like it's so much, and you're like, why do I need to know about the brain? You need to know about the brain because it's that level of care that sets the IBCLC apart. Being able to handle complex clinical cases with sound clinical decision-making and recommendations that are appropriate for higher acuity levels of care. So we talk about acuity, which is a level of care necessary for optimal outcomes. Do you have the skills necessary? I keep asking that question, I know, but it's to generate you to start thinking about, where am I going to get these skills? And really and truly, an intubated person, I just gave you probably the worst of the worst case. Seriously, you won't see that all the time. That is an exception. However, I have seen it, and I just want you to be aware that it exists. So the expectation is not that you're going into whatever clinical experience thinking, I've seen it all. However, once you build your skills, and you build your skills, and you build your skills in conjunction with your knowledge, you can say, well, you know what? I haven't encountered this situation before. This is not my knowledge set, but let me use my resources. Let me figure it out. Your skills will then develop into expert mode. Essential and timely. One of the things that we found out during this pandemic is that essential became a true buzzword. We found out that yes, lactation consultants are essential because babies still need to eat and parents still need support. During a pandemic, promoting and protecting the ability to provide human milk is critically important. And if you haven't seen the headlines the last week or so, that last sentence makes a whole lot of sense. But I'm not going to go off on a tangent. But not from just, so when we talk about being essential and timely, we're not talking about just from a standpoint of just being there. We're not talking about just from a standpoint of bonding, but we're also talking about from a public health and prevention standpoint. So yes, we are essential. It is important that we show up when we're needed, that we are timely, that many times we can't say no. We're in a pandemic now. So, and we don't know when this is going to be over. And so it would behoove us to not be essential because people rely on the skilled expertise of the IBCLC, particularly in complex situations when feeding their baby can become a matter of life and death. So wrap your mind around, we are frontline workers. And so I just want to make that really, really clear that, you know, yes, there is telehealth, and telehealth is great. But I'm going to tell you that sometimes telehealth is not the end all to be all, and we can miss certain things. Telehealth can sometimes prohibit the ability to use our other senses. You know, I can recall a case during the pandemic where a baby hadn't seen a pediatrician, and the parent had been calling for breastfeeding support, calling for support, couldn't get support. She said, I need in-home support. Well, it turns out that the baby couldn't effectively breastfeed, because the baby couldn't effectively feed from a bottle either. So there were some tone issues. When I say tone, I mean the tone, muscle tone in the baby's face. So me coming in, evaluating, looking at the whole big picture, I became the advocate for this family. I became the, okay, let me see. We need the baby to be seen as soon as possible so that the baby didn't lose weight and that further harm was not going to be caused to the health of the baby. So when I say that timely access is important and that we are essential to that, and that's exactly, there's no getting around that. So it's really prudent in our duty to show up so that we minimize systemic harms, costs to families, that we are accessible, because that's what becoming an IBCLC is all about. It's being able to provide accessible care at the time that it is needed. Collaborative care partner and trust. I love the word or the phrase collaborative care partner, because it assumes that while you are collaborating with your client, which means you aren't the center. You are not the decision maker. They are. They and their family and their loved ones. So what I'm saying about this is that we all know the recommendations. We all know exclusive breastfeeding for at least 6 months. We know those things, right? And it's important that we still honor those and we still talk about them. However, we also have to understand that we are collaborating in partnership, in agreement, and that when someone seeks our care, that we make sure that we approach it in a manner that we're not overstepping boundaries that we are not meant to overstep. And that's how you become trusted. Trusted to do no harm, trusted to be reliable, trusted to say, I see you as a person. I see that we're in this together. I am not higher than you. We are collaborating to do what's best for you. And that's how you become trusted. When you go into certain clinical relationships and situations and you assume a hierarchy, like, yep, I'm the expert, I know all about this. I've been teaching breastfeeding and chest feeding for 15 to 20 years. I'm going to tell you this is how it should work. Flip the baby, do this. You know, when you walk in with that sort of presence, you're going to lose trust, no doubt. When you go in and you touch someone without asking permission, you're going to lose trust. So go in understanding that you are the collaborator. You're there as their collaborative care partner. And trust that if you go in like that, you will gain their trust. Person-centered care. The Institute of Medicine defines patient-centered care, or person-centered, that's providing care that is respectful of and responsive to individual patient preferences, needs, values, and ensuring that patient values guide all clinical decisions. So I've talked a little bit about culture, I've talked about collaboration, and I've talked about care, the type of care you deliver, and how communication works. And the person is the center of all of those. And if you want more information, you can visit the website of the Institute of Medicine, and you can read a little bit more about person-centered care. But person-centered care has become a buzzword, really and truly. Don't let it become a buzzword for you. Really practice what this model looks like, and that would further build trust with your client, with your community, and also with other clinicians that you work with. So I've tried to provide some anticipatory guidance today. Angela is going to really dive in and talk about the different pathways. However, when she's speaking, think about these things. Some things that you should consider before starting your journey is, what pathway do I fit into best? What is the local market around me? Doing a market analysis, is there a need for lactation consultants? And trust me, there is a need. I'm telling you that right now. And also, how does this fit into my lifestyle? Will I be going into private practice? Where will I get mentorship from? Those are questions to ask yourself. But take it away, Angela, and let's dive into the pathways at hand.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sekeita, for that really that great explanation about what an IBCLC does. That's really phenomenal. So the process of becoming an IBCLC, it can seem a bit complicated, but I'm going to break it down and kind of give you a bit of a roadmap about how to become an IBCLC. So the first thing you want to do is choose a pathway. Now we're going to come back to that in just a minute. Each pathway, though, regardless of which one you choose, has three components. The first one is education. The second one is clinical hours. And the third one is getting ready for the exam. So, first one, health sciences education. This is the typical education for a healthcare provider. There are 8 post-secondary or university level courses and 6 general education subjects. You can find a full list for each of the 14 subjects on the IBLCE website. You can search for it, or you can find the link in your resource document under handouts in your interface. So the 8 university level courses are, and you don't need to write these down right now, biology, anatomy, physiology, infant and child growth and development, introduction to clinical research, nutrition, psychology or counseling skills or communication skills, and finally, sociology or cultural sensitivity or cultural anthropology. They can be online or in person, as long as the institution is accredited to provide the learning. Now, if you took any of these courses during your college career, they count, even if that was 20 years ago. LER partners with Union Institute and University, as well as Walden University, to provide those basic courses. Both organizations are online. The advantage of working with Union is their program director is an IBCLC and has chosen the college courses which meet the IBLCE requirements. If you want to get your bachelor's degree in maternal child health with a concentration in human lactation, take a look at Union. Another advantage with using one of these 2 universities is that they will accept federal financial aid in the United States. Now, the 6 general education subjects are medical documentation, medical terminology, occupational safety and security for health professionals, professional ethics for health professionals, universal safety precautions, and infection control and basic life support. 5 of the 6 general education courses can be taken through LER. The only one you will need to search for is basic life support. In many countries, there is an in-person skills check, but I've heard of some organization providing this training completely online. Do check with your local resources. In the resources, there is a link to the Health Sciences Education Guide. And that guide provides, when you take a look at it, it provides general descriptions for the typical courses in each one of these subject areas. Now, do keep in mind that IBLCE is an international organization. The names which they use in their document to describe the courses may not exactly fit the description in the course catalog at your accredited educational institution. And that's okay. IBLCE utilizes broad terms with the understanding that there is no universal description for, let's say, clinical research. So why are the 14 courses required? The IBCLC is a standalone credential, meaning you do not need another certification, degree, or license to practice as an IBCLC in most countries. Once you pass the exam, you will be an allied healthcare professional. The courses will help you to prepare for your career as well as to help you pass the IBCLC exam. So the second thing you need is lactation-specific education. Well, this is where we've got you covered. The education should be comprehensive and cover the IBCLC detailed content outline. IBCLC requires at least 90 hours of lactation-specific education, 5 hours on communication skills. Now, our 5-hour course is specific to lactation and breastfeeding care, and it can help you in your practice as a lactation consultant. I also want to make a quick note about our international equity pricing. We do have a sliding scale or differences in our price structure based on where in the world you are located. You can reach out to us at support@lactationtraining.com if you would like more information. The third thing that you need is lactation-specific clinical experience. This can include in-person consultations, telephone consultations, or online breastfeeding and lactation care that supports breastfeeding families. It also includes lactation assistance to pregnant and breastfeeding clients and lactation education to families and/or professionals. Now, these hours are to be obtained within the 5 years immediately prior to the exam. How many do you need? Well, that depends on your pathway. So here we have the pathways. Now, those clinical hours need to be accrued in the 5 years prior to applying for the exam. Now, this is a quick overview, and I will review this a little bit more in the following slides. Pathway 1 is for healthcare professionals and those who provide breastfeeding support through an IBCLC recognized breastfeeding support counselor organization. Healthcare professionals, according to IBCLC, includes physicians, nurses, midwives, dietitians, physical therapists or physiotherapists, speech pathologists, and others. Now, breastfeeding support counselors include those accredited through organizations such as LER, Lactation International, and the Australian Breastfeeding Association. As of this presentation, there are over 40 organizations that have applied to and approved by IBCLC. Now, the Pathway 2 folks, they must complete a comprehensive academic program in human lactation and breastfeeding through an accredited university. Now, their education has both didactic and clinical components, and they require 300 supervised hours working with breastfeeding and chest feeding families. Pathway 3 is a structured mentorship program between an IBCLC and an individual applicant. The IBCLC must be in good standing with IBCLC. So those who choose this pathway must have their program pre-approved by IBCLC prior to beginning to accrue their clinical hours. Now, I understand this is happening relatively quickly, like within a few weeks. A quick note for those of you who may have breastfed or chest fed or provided human milk for your child, the hours you spent nursing and pumping and helping your friends doesn't count towards your clinical hours. Now, while 500 or 1,000 hours seems like a lot, there's a really good reason why. Each candidate needs to have the clinical experience so they can provide competent care as an IBCLC. If it's any consolation, the number of required clinical hours was a lot more. I've known IBCLCs who needed anywhere from 2,500 to 8,000 clinical hours to sit the IBCLC exam. It helps to put that 500 or 1,000 hours into a little bit of perspective. So candidates who apply for the IBCLC exam through Pathway 1 need at least 1,000 clinical hours. For the candidate who's also a healthcare provider, the hours can be done in a hospital or a birth center, lactation care clinic or practice, or through independent practice as a licensed or registered healthcare professional in a non-healthcare setting. For breastfeeding support counselors from an IBCLC recognized organization, their hours can be earned in person or online. The location and type of support depends on the criteria provided by the recognized organization. The hours need to be counted on an hour-by-hour basis. Now, 2 important points about clinical hours. The first one is it's important for you to document the hours as you accrue them. Be very detailed in case IBCLC chooses to audit your application to take the exam. They may want to see some sort of documentation, such as a spreadsheet or other document where you counted your hours. And the 1,000 hours, the second point is that the 1,000 hours do not need to be directly supervised. Now, pathway 3, that one requires the 500 hours of clinical experience. It's best done in a busy private practice where you can work with many breastfeeding, chest feeding people and those providing human milk for their babies every day, such as a hospital or clinic setting. The hours count towards the 500 only when you're actually working with families. The observation hours do not count. Clinical experience is graduated. That is, it starts with observation, then doing tasks under supervision, then completing tasks independently with the IBCLC nearby to ask questions and discuss situations. LER has an internship program with many sites around the United States. Reach out to support at lactationtraining.com and we can connect you with our clinical internship director, Amy Black, to determine if we have a site in your area. If not, we can give you suggestions on how you can work with your local hospital to facilitate an internship site. Now, one thing that Amy wanted me to mention today is that you can't start to count your hours towards the internship requirement until both you and the IBCLC are comfortable with you working independently. Now, most interns will spend about 75 hours in orientation before they can begin to accrue those 500 hours. You can also take a look in your community to see if you can find a willing internship site or mentors. Now, you may need to reach out to many people to find someone with the time, experience, and capacity to agree to be your mentor. It's important to find that good fit. Talk with others who've been through pathway 3 to find successful strategies in finding a good mentor. Now, while this pathway is an additional step or two, some people will ask, well, is it worth it? Well, the answer is yes. Well, why? IBCLC publishes their score reports based on which pathway each person takes. And pathway 3 is the one which usually scores best on the IBCLC exam. And I think it's that mentorship that is the key component. Learning from an experienced clinician is well worth the extra effort involved at the beginning of this pathway. Now, a lot of people are asking whether or not they can accrue clinical hours via telehealth during the pandemic. The quick answer is yes. The longer answer is paraphrased from the IBCLC documents from 17 April and 6 October of 2020. IBCLC will allow the use of technology if certain parameters are met. You'll need to pay attention to the privacy rules and the privacy rules in your jurisdiction, as well as the Code of Professional Conduct and the clinical competencies for IBCLCs. Another important point that I want to highlight is that there should be, quote, observation using technology with two-way synchronous audio and visual components, the focus being on the mentor providing the mentorship and guidance to the applicant. Now, this guidance has been extended until 30 September of 2022. The bottom line is that it's important to read all of the IBCLC documents listed in the interim guidance. The link to the guidance is found in the resource document in the handout sections of this webinar or in the comments which accompany this video. Now at LER, we have two ways to gather your lactation-specific education. One is the Lactation Consultant Training Program, or LCTP, which is the full 90 hours front to back. The other is our core or bridge course. They're designed to meet your educational needs depending on your background and previous lactation training. So the first thing we have is this comprehensive course called LCTP. It's a 90+ hour course which is eligible for CERPs, CME, nursing contact hours, and CEs from ACNM, which is the College of Nurse Midwives in the United States. It's intended for those who do not have any lactation education and they know they want to become an IBCLC. Now, at LER, we have more than 35 of the most knowledgeable, experienced instructors who are practicing lactation consultants, researchers, authors who teach in our courses, including me and Sekeita. Our classes are economical. You can view them on a variety of devices such as your computer, tablet, or phone. They're optimized for a computer, but they can be reviewed later when you're on the go. We've been educating people in person and online since 1990. We update our course information with the latest peer-reviewed evidence on a regular schedule, but will update sooner as new evidence emerges. Have a question for one of our instructors or want to discuss a concept with your fellow students? There are several ways to connect and get the answers you need. We have a very active Facebook group for those who are in the 95-hour course, the core or bridge course, or even our exam review course, where the students can meet each other and support each other along the way. There are people who are IBCLCs in the group who can also support your journey. Upon the completion of the 95-hour course, you are eligible to take the Certified Breastfeeding Specialist exam. The exam is included in the price. Once you pass, you're a Certified Breastfeeding Specialist. This is to recognize you for the level of education you have attained. With this certification, you can begin to collect your clinical hours towards the IBLCE exam. Now, if you're unsure where to start, or you already have some lactation-specific education hours, then we have our core or bridge programs to meet your needs. They have the same advantages as the LCTP course. Our initial course is called Core because it will provide you with the core lactation education you need to understand what it means to begin supporting the normal course of breastfeeding. It's 52+ hours of online education. It covers the basics such as anatomy and physiology, infant growth and development, supporting the preterm baby, medications and breastfeeding, and many more. At the end of the course is the Certified Breastfeeding Specialist exam. Now, the bridge course is ideal for those people who have that basic lactation education and they need an additional 45 hours to qualify for the IBLCE exam. Topics in our bridge course include legal and ethical concerns for the lactation consultant, infant feeding and disasters, breastfeeding the infant with medical challenges, case studies, and clinical skills videos. Not sure where to start? If you're new to the profession, I would suggest the core course. Get your feet wet and see if becoming an IBCLC fuels that passion. Our 90-hour course, as well as our core and bridge courses, are available in Spanish. Capacitacion en Lactancia.com is our new website, which provides the same high-quality education found on LER in Spanish. Our team is here to help you now and in the future. We have tech support available 7 days a week. You can get your questions answered by experts in the field, and we will provide ongoing support for the next steps in your lactation career. You can get those content questions answered by experts, meaning a great example is last week, someone reached out to one of our instructors with a question specific to their lesson, to their own practice. We made the connection and the former student was able to get the answer to help their client. Another student had a question about creating a policy at their hospital, and we found the appropriate instructor to answer the question and provide those additional resources. Several members of our customer support team are IBCLCs, so we get it. We understand, we know the journey, and we are here to support you in yours. Thank you very much for your time today. Now comes the fun part. What sort of questions do you have today? Sekeita, what are you seeing in the question box?
Well, excuse me, I've really seen Kim be, fantastic at answering the majority of the questions that been present. And so at this point, I don't see any outstanding questions. Do you see any?
I don't. I think we can amplify though those questions that were answered by Kim, so that everybody who doesn't have the benefit of seeing it would be helpful. Oh, I'll take the first one here. What are typical fields where an IBCLC who works exclusively as an IBCLC would be hired? And so this person sees mostly positions where you need some other sort of certification or credential. Well, as I mentioned before, I am an IBCLC and I've been working in a hospital setting for 20 years. And so indeed, it does depend on your geopolitical region as far as whether or not they will hire someone who works exclusively as an IBCLC. But do look around. You would be surprised how many actually will and are welcoming for folks of us who have the IBCLC. One quick note about that. I think that the pandemic, this is one of my brainstorms, and people who know me know that I have a lot of brainstorming, but I think that now is the time for those of us who do work exclusively as IBCLCs and who would like to do that to reach out to these hospitals. You know, the nursing crisis around the world is real. And I think that to require an additional credential when there's no real need for it nor evidence to say that it's required is something that we may want to say, hey, we're here, we're trained, we know this lactation specific education, we know how to support families, let us help you, let us relieve some of that burden that you have, because we're here, we know we're frontline workers, and we want to do this work. So that's just one of my things. So please feel free to take it and run with it in your location. Anything to add to that, Sekeita?
No, Angela, you said it all extremely perfectly. So nothing to add at all. I do see a question that's been flagged. The question reads, have you heard of anyone who heard that haven't gotten approved? Have you heard of anyone that hasn't been approved by IBCLC? And if so, what were the reasons? I can personally say that I haven't, but I can also say that I have witnessed lack of integrity that was like, I don't know if that person should be approved, but you know, that's just me. But Angela, what about you?
I do know of people who have been, you know, they've been chosen for audit, and then during that audit, their application. So before you even take the exam, you submit an application to take the exam, basically attesting to the fact that you have all of the requirements. And there are times when you may be audited. They do a randomized audit of the different people who apply for the exam. And during that audit, it is, they may ask you for additional documentation. And so it's when people cannot provide that additional documentation satisfactorily, that's when the issue has been where they weren't able to sit the exam. Now, it doesn't mean they can never sit the exam. It just means that they need to either A, get better documentation, or B, they need to actually fulfill the requirements. And the one thing about the requirements, I mentioned it during the webinar, but I really want to say this again, is that, you know, the reason this is all part of the journey. And this journey will make you a better lactation consultant to support families. And so the more times you see certain scenarios, certain situations, the better prepared you are in order to provide that support. Even if you don't have the answer, knowing where to go for the answer, which is part of the study part, that's a really key component, as Sekeita mentioned earlier. I see a quick question here, Sekeita, as you are going through the question. Someone said, my IBCLC expired in 2015. How do I recertify? I would say reach out to the IBCLC office in your region. I believe the answer would be that you would need to potentially begin and take the didactic education again. If you're working actively, if you're working clinically, then you can use those clinical hours, but you would probably need to take the didactic training, at least take the didactic training again. And I will say that a lot has changed since 2015. Wouldn't you say, Sekeita?
Absolutely, absolutely. The evidence and the research supporting lactation specific topics is increasing as it should. But absolutely, lots has changed since 2015. Angela, there's a question here that, did I just lose that question? Come on, Sekeita, what you doing? It was flagged. Hold on.
That's fine. Someone else asked a quick question. I just noticed one here. So while you're finding that one, someone has already submitted their plan, their Pathway 3 plan, yay. And so if you do have that one mentor, that one chief mentor who is going to be sort of like supervising your training, that's great. If you have additional mentors, so let's say that your primary is going to be in a lactation clinic, that's wonderful. Let's say that you found a mentor who said, yeah, why don't you come here? You can come to my hospital. We have to, jump through the hoops to have you come to my hospital, but you can support families that I serve in the NICU. That's phenomenal. And so you could then take that IBCLC, you need their IBLCE number. You can then actually add their attestation that they're going to be one of your mentors to an already existing packet. So you can submit that later and say that you have an additional mentor. And so once you get that packet in with the first mentor and IBCLC approves it, they can actually provide you with more information about how to add an additional mentor if indeed you can find an additional mentor.
So there's a question that's a personal question, the one that begins with they're a nursing student and graduating in a couple months, seeking clarification. So I'm just gonna say that if you were doing pathway 1, yes, you would need to acquire 1,000 hours, but you would also need to acquire the lactation related LCERPs, the requirements for sitting. So you may have the health sciences courses, but you also have to do the lactation related courses. There was also, I'm curious about what detail the session needs to be documented in. So the way to document your hours, Angela, you talked about the calculator on IBLCE. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Kim. Kim just submitted an answer for that person. This next question says, would we submit pathway 3 application before we start lactation specific education as well, or just before getting clinical hours? Yes, you do want to make sure that you are consulting with IBLCE and submitting that you plan to do the pathway 3.
And you want to have that training ahead of time.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because, I mean, you want to know what you're looking at when you're actually working with a mentor. You want to know that, what that anatomy and physiology is, and that would help you with some of the reasons why they're practicing in a specific way. And so if you have that knowledge, most mentors want their students to either have all of the 95 hours before they start working with them, or at least a strong portion of it with a plan as to how they're going to complete the 95 hours, before they really start working more independently.
Next question, Angela, is there anyone in the staff who does a live webinar versus doing online studying at your own pace? Or is there anyone who does private mentoring to help study for the IBLCE exam?
So all of our content is recorded and intended for asynchronous learning. And so indeed, it is all recorded. We do on occasion do these live events about specific topics, and we've done them in the past, and so we have a lot of them either on our YouTube page or recorded previously on our website, and so you can take a look at those things, but they are recorded. So to your answer of do we do things live? Usually not. However, we're available. In other words, if you do have those questions and need some sort of mentoring towards the IBCLC exam, reach out to us. We are happy to answer your questions. We know how challenging it can be if you don't have an IBCLC in your community in order to ask these questions. And so absolutely, Sekeita, you and I are mentoring folks on a very regular basis. We don't mind answering questions. Our customer support team, we have 3 folks on our customer support team. 2 of them are IBCLCs. And so they're happy to answer your questions. And here's something which is a surprise. The surprise is that we answer the phone. In that, usually, if you have to leave a voicemail, if we're super busy, but I mean, if you call us, we're going to answer the phone or we're going to get back to you relatively quickly. So we will call you back. It's not just some number on a cloud that, we're screening everything first. No, we answer the telephone. So please do call us if you do have those questions.
There's something that's going on with my voice here today. I'm doing 1,000 hours and have completed them, but did I need to submit a plan for them?
So the answer is no. You don't need to submit a plan for it because you're under pathway 1. Only pathway 3 needs that plan submitted and approved before you do them. So phew, right? I mean, that's what a relief.
Next question, postpartum doula since 2019, own their own business, hoping to add lactation skill set. What pathway is suggested?
So I would say, oh, go ahead.
No. I didn't know if you were going to talk about a breastfeeding support organization, Angela. So go ahead, because that's where I was going.
Well, I would say yes, you can either do one or three, so 1, 3. So if you don't have an IBCLC in your community, then by all means do go through pathway 1. As we mentioned, LER is a breastfeeding support organization. We currently have a pilot program going in order to determine, it's not something which you'll find on our website, the fact that we're a breastfeeding support organization. Because of this pilot program, we're trying to determine what the resources are in order to support this program throughout all of LER. And we're pretty close to it. As a matter of fact, Sekeita, I noticed a couple of our pilot cohort in our chat today. So hey, y'all. So really happy to see you here. Exactly. So I would say either one, probably pathway 1 would support you the most. And I would say, yes, offering services as an IBCLC is ideal. And as you work towards that, become a CBS first. And then that way parents will see you, they will be able to see your lactation specific education, that you can sort of stand out in that doula community and say, I am specifically trained to offer lactation support. It's not, and to support the normal course of breastfeeding. It's not something where I'm basing it only on my experience. I've done additional training in this. And so do consider becoming a CBS through either the core course, or if you know you want to do this IBCLC thing, go into the straight up, 95-hour course and do take a look at it, do review it, do learn it, take the test, become a CBS, and then begin supporting your families. Is that about what you were going to say, Sekeita?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Angela. Next question, do college courses from over 10 years ago count? Yes, they do, as long as they are the college courses that fit the health sciences that IBCLC requires. Next question, what is it like to have a private practice versus working in a hospital? What are the challenges of both? That's like a whole webinar type question.
Such
really.
a webinar.
Let me sum it up this way. In a private practice, really, you have to understand the market where you're working. You have to understand, what the prices are, what people can afford. You also have to be responsible for every single thing, because that is your business, that is your private practice, so overhead. You also have to know what you're doing. And you also have to look at legalities and have, for instance, liability insurance, those sorts of things. So there's a ton of stuff that goes into private practice. When you're working in a hospital setting, you go to work and you have a schedule and you're on the schedule for the hospital. And I'm not going to say that part, but I believe in keeping it real, but I also want to keep some of my biases out of it, right? And so, so when you're working in a hospital setting, there's just a different feel. You're working primarily, usually, with newborn, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day old, or in the NICU population, neonatal intensive care. When you're working in the community and you have your own private practice, you have a wide range of things. You're working on weaning sometimes, hyperlactation sometimes. You're working on different issues, so to speak, that you would not necessarily see in the first week of lactation. So I hope that kind of sums that up.
Right. I think it depends on where that passion is, right? In other words, if you're super comfortable helping, families with older babies, then I would say, yes, that you may want to, support families in private practice. Some people are really good at that first 5 days, and or they work in an obstetric environment. And so they really do want to do that prenatal education, which is so important in order to get breastfeeding off to a good start. And so, yes, those are definitely the differences between the two. Somebody else asked a similar question, which is, I think we all understand the incredible rewards of pursuing this career, but I'm curious about the biggest challenges. Mind sharing? So, some of the challenges as someone who works exclusively as an IBCLC, then I have to be mindful of that fact if I'm going out and looking for a job. And so it's really important to do that market analysis before you get started with this in order to find out what your community will support as far as you being able to get a job. And is a job important to you, meaning that you need to be making that living wage or better? Or is it something that you, where you're just looking for, a little additional income, or do you want to do it completely as a volunteer? Whatever your capacity is, as well as whatever your circumstances are, that's something really important to look at. One of the challenges of working in private practice is that you're always out there hustling, always out there working. One of the secrets I tell folks when they're starting their private practice is be available on weekends and evenings and holidays, because that is when, sometimes other people are engaged with other things. I'm in a point in my career where somebody calls me on a holiday, on a religious holiday, I'm here. It's cool. Let's talk. Let me give you a few things that you need to get you through until you can meet with somebody. So sometimes your time is not your own. I often joke that my children and or partner can answer questions, basic questions such as how to deal with engorgement, because I have had those 2 a.m. phone calls. And so I do know that that is definitely one of the challenges. What would you say would be maybe a challenge? What do you think, Sekeita? What can you add to that?
For private practice?
Either, or hospital practice.
Well, honestly speaking, depends on what community you serve, but the biggest challenge for me is in the community I serve is that the needs are sometimes great. And so whereas I might have planned an hour and a half for a consult, that consult might end up being 3 hours. And how do I account for that? And so just to be honest, being in private practice requires patience. It requires knowledge that your time should be flexible. A lot of times, particularly now, when we're dealing with lactation concerns, we're also dealing with mental health concerns due to the pandemic, due to lots of grief that has occurred. And so we are truly, I feel like it's a gift to be welcomed in someone's home in their vulnerability, but we have to, it's more delicate now being in private practice than it was prior to the pandemic. There has definitely been a shift. And so those are the things that I would offer versus when you're going to the hospital, you usually go to the hospital, you see your clients, and you really don't have enough, you don't see them again unless you are working in an outpatient setting at that particular institution. However, when you are doing private practice, you are developing lifelong relationships. You probably will be their consultant for the next one and the next one after, or some of their family members, right? And so really understanding that it is a commitment of time. And I think that's the only thing that I would add, Angela, for that.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a question though specific to LER. The course that LER offers for the CBS credential satisfies those hours, correct? That's the first part. If we need a refresher, does LER offer something like that? So yes, our course satisfies that need. If you need a refresher, we always have courses on top of courses. We're creating new courses, but we also have a 75-hour course that you can retake that was used for recertification when IBCLC was requiring that. So absolutely. And I hope that answers the question. Angela, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that's it.
Okay.
I see the next question here.
Gotcha.
By the way, this person is in our pilot program, and they may be fangirling right now with you chatting. But anyway, if we have an approved Pathway 3 plan in place and have accrued some hours but switch to Pathway 1, do those hours count towards the 1,000 hours? So the one thing about the pathway is that you need to get started on it and stay with that pathway. Now, this person though is switching from 3 to 1.
Okay.
And so they're doing 1 through us now. And so, yes, those hours can count as long as they were accrued after we became a breastfeeding support organization. And so that would be August 1st of 2021. And so please do be mindful of that. when you are counting those hours, and make sure to fill out the spreadsheet that we provided to you so that you can count those hours.
So I see why you said that, Angela, because now I see the flagged question. And thank you so much for your comment. And would I be open to virtual mentorship in the future? This is something that I would love to talk a little bit offline. So perhaps we could link up. I will tell you that I got a request this morning for mentorship. And one of the things I do is I believe in, before mentorship, relationship building. And so definitely, and also being a resource. So maybe not mentorship in a way that you may be following me to consult, so to speak. But I am open to discussion, to kind of figuring out what it is that you're looking for. So we can definitely connect in that way and talk about possibilities. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, the nice thing also is that, Sekeita and I and, Julie and Kim and Nikisha, we take a look in the Facebook group and we can get pinged a lot. And so if we're pinged and somebody says, hey, I've got a specific question, they ping us and we're there. So we're happy to answer those questions, sort of through that umbrella. And, we're relatively available as well. So yeah, go ahead.
This question about which material is best to study for the test. I see a lot of books and materials that are suggested. Which is the best?
So I'm actually typing a response to this person now. So, and my answer is that we actually have an exam review course, which is, I want to say, Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say it's about 30 webinars that goes over each aspect of the detailed content outline. And we provide you with worksheets, as well as worksheets that have the answers in them in that. And then access to QBank, which has over 500 questions, evidence-informed questions in our database, and you can take those practice exams. And so that's something which you may find helpful. Another thing, if you'd like a book, if you go to our website, lactationtraining.com, and take a look in our bookstore, you may be able, you'll find plenty of books there that we have recommended, including and all of the books. I think the top like 6 or 7 books, actually we have negotiated to get a discount for everybody. And so if you go to our website and go to the bookstore, you can find those resources there with the discount. And so please do, take a look there and see if there's something there which meets your needs. Each book has their own niche. And that's why, for example, I have like all of them. And the reason why is because, one book is really good on this subject, one book is really good on that. So there is no one comprehensive book that if you buy that book, you're going to pass the test. There isn't one out there. So each one has their own flavor. I think it depends on where you plan to practice, how you plan to practice, as far as which resource is going to be best for you to take the exam.
I want to say my favorites, but I feel like I would be endorsing. So let me just go to this final question, that we have here. Are we able to satisfy our hours for Pathway 3 through a virtual mentorship? The answer is yes, because at this point, IBCLC has allowed for it, but again, you should probably have that stated, in your application on how you plan to receive your hours.
Someone's asking about the pilot program. If you want more information about that, it currently, as of this recording, it's not on our website, but if you reach out to support@lactationtraining.com, they will forward your request to me, and we'll have a chat. Okay, good. I think that's it. If somebody else is agreeing that their partner too could answer some basic lactation questions. I think one of my kids could put together a pump by the time they were 3. So
yeah, that brings me to one of the challenges of also having a private practice is having your partner or spouse come back and say, oh, here, I got this consult for you, twins. They're having, so-and-so in the meat market, they're having twins. And this is a true story. How do you know they're having twins? And how do you know she's breastfeeding? Because I asked. Okay, really? So that's another, you get business from your partners for real. They drum it up for you. So yeah.
Yeah, they do. They do. That's it. I mean, I get, as a matter of fact, the current challenge that we're dealing with, we're going to date this webinar, Sekeita, as far as the recall of breast milk substitutes in the United States, as well as the subsequent shortage. My brother called me and asked me what I'm going to do about it. So we get it from all sides as far as what to do and how to do it, you know. And so, yes, we're here to support everybody,
Yes,
no matter the situation.
absolutely.
I
This
think
has
we're
been
good on.
fun as always for me. I want to
Love
thank
it.
you all for joining us this afternoon, evening, or morning, depending on where you are in this world. And just feel free to reach out at support@lactationtraining.com if you need to. Angela?
Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.